When will inflation come down? I could answer this question by pointing to the inflation forecasts of private forecasters or of FOMC participants, which broadly show a significant decline over the next year. But forecasts have been predicting just
I'm Christopher Chrystal with Financial Stockholm. Today is Monday, December 5th, 2022, and these are our thoughts about the market and what's happening, what we've been seeing over the weekend. So here we go. The Swedish press has been focused primarily on a lot of peripheral news, more about the politics and the kind of infighting between our political parties running our government. So we did have the Social Democrats in charge. Now they've stepped to the side because they were voted out, and we have the Moderaterna party, which has a large coalition backing by the Swedish Democraterna, and they're considered the far right. So we have a lot of mudslinging between the parties, everybody blaming everybody else for how the electricity prices are. We have very high electricity prices. They're going to go higher after December, and because we'll have an increase in our tax. And the hydropower isn't as good right now because we have a lot of it frozen in the north. And we have a grid issue where we don't have enough really electricity. We've had a maintenance issue on one of our nuclears. So they have to disconnect the actual reactor from the grid while they repair it. So while the previous government was in charge, they didn't maintain the maintenance schedules. So it's very difficult to run a nuclear power plant if you don't maintain. They're on a cycle where you need to make maintenance about 1.5 to 2 years, every 1.5 to 2 years. And oddly enough, this is happening coinciding with the same time it's happening in France. It's happening in Finland. And I didn't see any other nuclears, but they are building a nuclear in England. And I didn't hear about theirs, but they're no longer part of the EU, right? So who cares? But in all seriousness, the nuclear is getting under a lot of pressure. But if you look at the cost of production in terms of the amount of investment that Germany has in solar and wind panels, solar panels and windmills, and then you look at the solar and wind panels or windmills in France, and then you compare the nuclear and you compare the cost of the energy and what consumers are paying, you get a very simple formula on you should be investing more in nuclear and you should be maintaining your nuclear because you will get more bang for your buck out of the nuclear. And this is something that's very clear when you measure up the amount spent and versus the amount produced. So we have this problem right now in Sweden where we don't have enough power. We do have parties saying that we're a net seller of our energy, which doesn't make any sense because we should be producing for our own consumer. However, we have record levels of cost, and we'll see record levels of cost after December. So there's not a lot of making sense here, and we'll wait to see how this comes out. On top of that, we do have news from China that the lockdowns look like they will go away for the COVID. And the Swedish press is criticizing this as putting the citizens at risk and to benefit the economy as opposed to keep the citizens safe. The article is a little strange because here in Sweden, we didn't lock down. We didn't have mask mandates. If you were riding public transportation, you were recommended to wear a mask, but you were not in a scenario like they have in China. So it's a bizarre article considering our history here in Sweden, how we handled the COVID versus what they're writing in the press. So we'll see what happens. And then also we have an article talking about the hijabs in Iran and that the moral police have been, according to the Iranian government, moved out of service. We'll see how that develops. But the irony here is that if you have protests in what are considered autocracies making a difference where the protesters get what they want versus say in Australia where people protested against the COVID and then got locked up in a democracy, it's a little odd, and it's a troubling tale of the way our democracies are heading. Now, on top of this news about the energy and the nuclear, we do have news coming out of the EU where they've set a price cap for the oil coming out of Russia. Now, Russia has oil shipping fleets, and they do have pipelines. They're going to run 2 fleets. One fleet, which is called the Shadow Fleet, will be able to ship to other countries, and it'll be able to evade the sanctions. And then the primary shipping fleet will be used to ship their oil and natural gas. Now, there is the EU has proposed a price of $60 a barrel, and it'll be interesting to see how they're able to enforce this. They do have sanctions in place, which are supposed to help with the enforcement. However, Russia has said, if you're not going to pay us the market rate, and the market rate is currently around $80+ per barrel, maybe 89. I haven't checked the price this morning. Then we're not going to sell you the oil. So Russia's very clearly saying, if you don't pay the market rate, we're not going to sell it to you. And Europe is saying, you're going to pay 60 or we're not going to buy it. So it seems to be a fait accompli that Europe will not be buying oil from Russia, although Europe needs to. So we'll see how this works out. But it definitely needs some time for people to understand. And we still have a lot of comments coming out from Ursula von der Leyen talking about Ukraine and giving our generators to Ukrainian people so they can stay warm in the winter. What she seems to not understand is that people in Sweden need to keep warm and may need those generators for themselves, as they may not be able to afford their electricity, and their home generators may do a better job. But we'll see how that goes. In terms of the NATO application, we're still waiting on the NATO application, but it looks like we've extradited an individual from Sweden to Turkey who was on the list or was not on the list. It's not entirely clear. We have our continued social problems here in Sweden, where we've had shootings over the weekend. We've had a number of house fires, but that is probably attributed not so much to gang activity, but more to the problem of people not knowing how to run their fireplace, or perhaps when they've run their fireplace in the past, they haven't had the flue swept, and maybe that's causing their house fires, that they've had a lot of creosote in their chimneys. But anyway, the main issue here is that the Swedish economy is in a downturn, and when we've had the Chinese figures showing that the shipping is slipping and the manufacturing is slipping, we may be headed for a global recession. And there I would refer you to somebody like Larry Summers, or if you want to look at it from the quote-unquote greener side of things, I would refer you to Bjorn Lomborg. Neither one is going to give you a positive outlook, because the cost of transition for what we're doing from products that work and can provide us with the energy to products that have been tested and we don't have enough of, will not work, is very clear. So you can read up on those. But what I would always say is, remember, there's always money to be made in the market. So we have a forecast coming out in the Swedish tech market talking about there's going to be a wipeout, and there's going to be a lot of our tech companies that are going to be hurt. So if you're into shorting, you can certainly do your reading there. And if you're into long term, you can certainly take a look at companies like Frontline, which would be a beneficiary of this Russian oil issue, due to the shipping from Norway. So there's always money to be made, whether you're long or short, short term or long term. And with that, we wish you a happy investing. Thank you very much for your time.